We finally got to the last month of the year so that we can look forward to 2021. Welcome to the CUNY BMI Town Hall for December 2020. We're so delighted to have you all join us virtually, wherever you are, at home, on the phone, all the students, faculty, and staff. We appreciate you. As we always say in the beginning, the CUNY Black Male Initiative exists to improve retention and graduation efforts of Black and Latino men at the City University of New York, with over 4,000 students that we support through funding from the City Council for 15 consecutive years. We're so lucky to be able to support students that are getting their GEDs or their HSCs. They're in community colleges, they are senior colleges, they are in law school, they are in medical school. They're also reentry students who are coming from justice backgrounds back into college. So we have a robust community of people that we support. We know there are faculty, staff, students who are watching today, and we love you and appreciate you being a part of this family, and love that we are able to make a difference at CUNY because of the supports that the CUNY BMI is able to give in mentoring, academic support, and socio-emotional programming. So with that being said, Town Halls has been an amazing, robust opportunity to meet people in our community that have been impacting our neighborhoods for a long time. I live in Harlem, as I often reference, and I talk about being near the Schomburg and the hospital. Turns out one of these esteemed panelists is actually my neighbor. And so I'm excited to just really have this dialogue with you all. But let me just give you a quick overview of what we're talking about today, and then we're going to launch into some conversation with our esteemed panelists. So today our topic is rhythm and the word, our activism, and our music. And as many of you know, I was a full-time musician for many years. I got to lead, direct the Apollo's 80th anniversary celebration. I got to do a lot of world events around the world, playing with gospel artists and R&B and music, and doing wedding gigs and whatever we had to do as drummers just to get around. And so we're really lucky to have some amazing panels today, including one of my favorite drummers of all time, who's going to be here. But as an overview, we know that culturally, we're constantly under attack, right? We're threatened physically, emotionally, psychologically because of COVID-19 and the disproportionate effects on Black and Brown communities. We also understand that how have we come this far except through having resilience that comes from cultural traditions that we keep and round up higher and higher through repetition and tradition, and being able to call on that. So through our faith, our hope, and our love collectively, we're looking to transform our spirits by elevating the Afro and the Afro-Latino experience in music and culture to make sure that our spiritual forces are recognized and that we're shaping the souls of Black folks going forward. So with that being said, we have so many cultural messengers in our day that have shaped music. Some of my favorite cultural messengers have been Curtis Mayfield, George Clinton, Marvin Gaye, Gil Scott-Heron, Motown, Rafael Cortillo, Ray Barretto, Johnny Pacheco, Tito Puente. I can go on and on. I have so many musical heroes that have helped shape my experience and probably shaped your experience as well. And we know that with a brown and mighty, powerful people from the sun, we have moved forward rhythm and music in our world in ways that have been appropriated and taken and reused for other purposes in every single capacity, no matter what the genre is, whether it be soul or Motown or merengue or rock or gospel or any other rhythms that exist out there. From my time even traveling and playing different instruments across the world and learning the djembe in Africa and all these different instruments and styles and rhythms, I know that we have transformed. A lot of our cultural, political revolutions have come from musical movements. And so even when I think about Malanda and even about apartheid in South Africa, there was a musical movement that caused a political shift in the atmosphere. So with that being said, we're going to talk about how do we fight the power as a collective with using our minds, our talents, and our energies to make sure that we're moving forward equity and inclusion for all people going forward. Often when we're talking about equity and inclusion for Black and Brown people, we're talking about it for all people. So we want to make sure that we're really clear that we're supporting all backgrounds and those who are being positively affected by the CUNY Black Male Initiative. So I want to start out by just reading a little bit about the panelists of who we are having this room today, and then hear from you all panelists just to kind of open up just what are some of those influences in your life that really shaped your perspective of music and culture. I'd love to hear from that so we can educate our young people who are here on this call today to learn about how we move forward and preserve traditions and history. So real quick, brief introductions. One of my favorite drummers of all time, Will Calhoun, is a Berklee College music graduate, two-time Grammy winner with the genre-bending iconic rock band Living Colour. And if y'all don't know about Living Colour, please Google them today. If you are 18, 19 years old, you've never heard this other than outside of the Wayans brothers, you need to go and find a Living Colour.
Halo.
Exactly. So he's produced a wide range of music with different artists, Harry Belafonte, B.B. King, Wayne Shorter, Public Enemy, Mick Jagger, and others. Please find him at willcalhounart.com. He is a legend. Will, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us today, my brother.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We have another legend who is here, Ron Scott. Ron is a friend of our good brother, Ron West, and who's connected to me and a neighbor of mine in Harlem. And so he writes weekly column notes, jazz notes for the Amsterdam News. He also is the senior editor of Forever Harlem, which was a pictorial history of Harlem from 1896 to 2006. He also is a freelance writer. He's written for the New York Times, Vogue Magazine, Daily News, Time Out New York, Johnson Publications, ABC Radio, so on and so on. He's also lectured at CUNY. He's lectured at Howard University. He's lectured in South Africa. We have a lot of connections in past that we've crossed, Ron. So I look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you and welcome.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And last and certainly not least, we have a badass performer here and amazing band leader and author and contributor to our culture. So Aurora Flores, she is a composer, producer, educator, entrepreneur, and recipient of many awards, including the Who's Who in Hispanic America. A published author and journalist, she broke barriers as the first woman music correspondent for Billboard magazine, while still at Columbia University. Her name appears in hundreds of Latin music liner notes and thousands of articles on music, culture, community, and politics over mainstream newspapers and magazines and media outlets. So as a BMI composer, she actually writes original music for Nickelodeon. She wrote for Dora the Explorer. She wrote and for the Orchestra Zon del Barrio, where she leads and directs, performing from New York to Caribbean and to France's also Côte d'Azur. So she does a lot. I can go on and on, but essentially she is an entrepreneurial publicist and award-winning media consultant, writer, and producer who founded Aurora Communications in 1988, was smart enough to branch out on her own, start her own business, took care of her business, and now she has basically run block parties and sold out shows all over the world, including Madison Square Garden and beyond. So I can go on and on. Aurora, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. At least I broke some barrier. The woman, I keep breaking them.
And I appreciate you being also that woman voice that we need here on this call as well.
No, it's very important. I like that you have this Black Men's Initiative. And yes, I think it's important to hear all of our voices.
Yeah. Well, actually, here's the funny thing about CUNY BMI, our Black Male Initiative, we actually have about 40% of our students are actually women. And so they get supported by similar networks. We exist to move the needle for Black and Latino men, because that's always been the hardest and lowest performing demographic at CUNY, but we welcome everybody. So we're so delighted that you're here. And since we're talking to you now, would you mind go ahead and just launch in? Tell us, what were your influences? What got you ignited about being a musician and doing the work that you do?
There was always music in my family. The first words I remember of my mother was her singing to me. And my grandparents, since I was the eldest of four, and then there was my mother and my father. So it was, of course, cheaper to bring my grandparents from Puerto Rico than the other way around. So for the holidays from Thanksgiving until Three Kings Day, because we celebrated Three Kings Day, my grandparents would come and my grandfather played accordion. My grandfather came from the mountains of Lajas in Puerto Rico. It's like a southern western province. And he played, it's sort of the Afro-Caribbean plena, like newspaper of the poor people of Puerto Rico from the turn of the last century. There was a newspaper, but a lot of people didn't read. So these musicians on drums, usually accompanied by an accordion, sometimes a clarinet, something that would travel. And they'd go from town to town giving news. And my grandfather came from that ilk, and he played all these tunes. And after dinner, we'd jam, and my uncles would come, and one of them played a cuatro, which is like a 10-string guitar, small lute, and another one would play a guitar. And back in those days, you could go to 42nd Street and actually record a record. So I had other uncles who would record and bring them. So this was happening in my family at this time. And we were in Harlem, we were in the projects. It was the mid 50s. And there was a lot of music happening. And my mother in particular, she was really into the Afro-Caribbean music, and she loved Cortijo.
Ah, okay.
And I really got into Cortijo. And it was so funny that later on, when I became a Latin music correspondent at Billboard, his lead singer, Imael Rivera, is my neighbor when I moved into my own apartment. And my God, he really taught me about my Afro-Puerto Rican roots and how to dance. I mean, it was an incredible experience at that time, breaking through. And I went to music and art for a little while, but again, my father did not want me to be in music. You know, back then they thought women in music would get lost to drugs and dereliction and all of that. And my mother was always worried. And, you know, they always wanted you, like in the African-American community, they wanted us to be nice little girls and become teachers or become lawyers. And they took me out of music school. I was studying bass with Frederick Zimmerman. I was his last student. And I was like his little charity class. I was in music and art. I did my first recording at 15 with the Borough-wide Orchestra. We did Handel's Messiah. I was first chair of 10 basses. It was, but he didn't want me there, but I went to college and threw them a curveball and became a Latin music writer.
Yeah, you definitely.
And I was in the thick of things when things were really happening, you know. The 70s, you know, was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Well, in the Latino community was sex, drugs, and salsa. It was sex, drugs. And I have to tell you that what made salsa really popular and mainstream was the jazz DJs. The Jewish and the African-American DJs brought salsa to the top, because at that time, first of all, there was maybe one Spanish language radio show, and it was only for a few hours. And then after 62, 64, after the Cuban embargo, a lot of the white Cubans, they went to Miami, but the Black Cubans and the Chino Cubanos, they came to New York. And after that, you see all these botanicas, all these Chino Cubanos. And because of that embargo, then you had a few white Cubans who came they were radio jocks in Cuba. So they started doing programming, but they hated our music. They hated salsa. They said, those crazy Puerto Ricans, what's wrong with them singing about revolution and marching and equal rights? And they're with African. Oh, they didn't put us up. They did not play Ray Barretto. They did not play Larry Harlow. They did not play the Five All-Stars. So it was a very interesting time, as you could see. But I was always a curious child, and I was in the thick of things.
Listen, what's up with Cuba? We got to get them. We got to figure out what's going on with them. But I appreciate that background. There is so much to dig into. I'm writing notes copiously because I'm like, there's so many things you said I'm already wanting to follow up on. But thank you for that introduction of just how you were influenced. I want to hear also from you, Ron, as well about your influences. What shaped your relationship with music initially, and how did it get you here today?
Okay, this goes back to when I was very young, and I lived a few blocks from where I partially grew up on 135th Street and 8th Avenue. So when I was a kid, at that time, as Aurora and Will probably know, Apollo had 6 shows a day. They opened at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the last show started at 10 at night. So my mother, when I was a kid, she used to sometimes go shopping at Bloomstein on 125th Street. And then from there, she would take me to the Apollo to like maybe a 2 o'clock show in the afternoon. The Apollo used to show, they would show the newsreel and a cartoon, or maybe just the newsreel. Needless to say, when they showed the cartoon, I was overjoyed. But then after the show was over, the screen went up. They had this like see-through curtain, and all of a sudden you hear this band playing, right? But you couldn't really see them because it was dark. You just saw the curtain. It was the first time, must have been around maybe 5 or 4, I heard a big band. That sound like freaked me out. I was like, whoa, what's that? You know, so that kind of initiated me to the whole big band thing. So this went on for a couple of years, my mother taking me to the Apollo. Then as I grew up, as teenagers, we went to the Apollo, but not to see jazz. We went to see Smokey Robinson, the Temptations, Mary Wells, and all of those folks, and the brothers from the Lincoln Projects, because now I lived in the Bronx. They used to chase us out of the Apollo. Everybody used to sit in the balcony.
Wow.
We used to run down the stairs, make that left turn, and haul butt to Lenox Avenue and get on that subway. And guys from Lincoln, you know, they'd be like right on us, you know. Wow. So now I go to college.
That was just territorial disputes. That was just
the
wrong neighborhood.
You know, and I don't know what it was with the Bronx and Harlem, but they, for some reason, they had a thing about eating more projects, you know. But so I'm in high school. I'm doing that, but the whole jazz thing doesn't really come back again until I'm like maybe in my junior year of high school. My close friend's father, Jose DaCosta's father, was heavy into Miles Davis. We used to go to his house, right? We'd be playing all of these doo-wop records. He'd be like, take that garbage off. This is real music. He put on a Miles, like someday my prince will come. That was it. That was, and later on, when I became older, that was one of the first albums I bought, you know. So he got us into that. But then we also got into Oscar Brown Jr. because the thing in high school at lunchtime was to be able to recite Signifying Monkey or Bid a Man, you know. So we all used to recite that all the time. And the writing didn't really come until I got to grad school at NYU, School of Social Work. I was looking for a part-time job and happened to look on a board and it said, looking for writer. The name of the magazine was called Soul Sounds Magazine. The cat was out in Brooklyn. I went all the way out to Brooklyn, talked to the brother, and he was like, yeah, man, you know, you ever wrote before? I'm like, yeah. I'd never written anything in my life other than book reports and stuff. So he hired me, you know. So he says, yeah, all you need to do, you know, if you could cover some concerts or if you could do some record reviews or whatever, you're good. So I said, okay. So a very close friend of mine, Laverne Perry, she was at Epic Records at the time. So she hooked me up. So she used to always give me albums. So I remember the first album that I reviewed was the OJ's, you know, and it was, and the only record on there that really got me, that had this incredible hard kicking band sound, was 992 Arguments. You know that, right?
Yeah.
And I wrote a whole thing about that. And that was like my springboard into writing. But after I left grad school, I stopped writing because I really wanted to be a social worker. That's what the whole thing was about. So I just went back to social work and I just kind of forgot about, you know, but I used to go, at one point I used to promote concerts. We had an organization called the Pride in New York, and we hosted jazz concerts on Tuesday nights at the Hotel Diplomat, right, on 43rd Street. We had Roy Haynes there, Chico Hamilton, Sun Ra, and I think the tickets at the time like $2 or $3. to get in. You know, so when you talk about activism and all of that, and you mentioned cats like Sun Ra, who were like eons ahead of his time, you know. So, and then it was from there, and I just started writing more and more, and I got more entrenched into jazz because, as I mentioned from the Apollo, I still had that bug. I just didn't realize it until I got older, you know. So yeah, now here I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. That's so many good things. There's a connection that I hear also so far about just where you all were playing and recording music as well. It seems like there was a lot there in Midtown and things going on back then. So I want to follow up on that a little bit. But just finally, the legend, Will Calhoun, man, I'm just so honored to have you here. I'd love to hear just like who impacted you and what made you decide to take the route to use art as a means of like living this life.
Well, thank you. First of all, it's great to be here, and it's great to be on the panel with two fabulous artists and human beings that made major contributions to the art. So it's an honor to be here. For me, is my mom and my neighborhood. Very fortunate. I still live in the same neighborhood I grew up in. I'm in the Northeast Bronx. So I laugh a little bit when I hear about Edenwald projects because I know what he's talking about. But I'm the youngest of three. My mom is a really tremendous woman. We had a 2-family house. She opened up the basement to the neighborhood children so we can have rehearsal place to rehearse. Everybody left their gear at our house. It's really fortunate. The great Ray Chu lived right behind me. So his backyard faced my backyard. Steve Jordan lived a few blocks away. Errol Pumpkin Bedwood, great drummer, original hip hop in terms of, to me, sampling rap. Was selling beats to labels in 1972. And Pumpkin also was an esteemed bass player and classical pianist. But I'll say those were my neighbors amongst a lot of other people. And they were all older than me. So, you know, I saw Steve Jordan on television when I was a child. So our parents were really about academics, art, and respect. You know, we had the dads that we feared in the neighborhood. When they would roll up on us, we would clear our throats and get our shirts in line. So it was a community thing. One of my best friends was Puerto Rican, the Torres family, and I was over their house all the time. And Mr. Torres would always say, Calhoun, you got to listen to Cachao, you got to listen to Tito Puente, you got to listen to Ray Barretto. You know, I was a Latin food freak, love my pasteles, love my oros con pollos, and the way Miss Torres made it was always great. Our families were so tight that even sometimes I would bring my friends down to my grandparents' house in North Carolina. My grandfather was an autonomous farmer, didn't want to be a part of the system, wanted to teach us about being independent, having your own money, having your own things. All of these things are why I played music and why I chose this path. This was my neighborhood. I had a beautiful, fantastic neighborhood, great friends, Puerto Rico, from Cuba, from Haiti, St. Kitts, Jamaica, is all of this stuff. Irish friends, you know, I'm in the Bronx by Allerton Avenue, a lot of Italian friends. I went to Jewish summer camps. My mother was into diversity, so every summer we had to go to these Jewish summer camps over here in Pelham Parkway. Took classical piano lessons. I didn't like it, but that's what I did when I was a youth. My mom was really into diversity and knowing, you know, reading about things and then giving us room. She always gave us space. You know, she liked Leontine Price and the Staple Singers and that kind of stuff, but she gave us room to get Earth, Wind and Fire and Ray Barretto and Jackson 5 and Parliament Funkadelic. So I have to put all of the investment and energy into my community. I am a product of my community. The stuff that I wrote while in Living Color in the band presently, how I play my instrument, what I think about art has taken me around the world, allowed me to live in Africa, mostly West and North and Central Brazil and Recife and Olinda and those towns, Bahia, and allowed me to travel around. So everywhere I go, I always feel like I'm connected to my community, and my community is 100% responsible for me taking this route and being an artist and being, I feel, politically correct on an angle of what it means to be a human being in the universe first, and then what it means to be a Black man second.
Love that. That's beautiful. So clearly, Will, I mean, your art has taken you around the world. You mentioned all these places and people and things you've experienced because of your exposure. Obviously, your mom was a big contribution of that, but also the other community members that are around you. So this question is for everybody, but also maybe, Will, you can start it off for us. Because I'm thinking about just the idea of like human rights, right? We know that, we're in a time where Black Lives Matter is the common refrain that I'm saying, my colleagues are saying, we're trying to get awareness. And the fact that we have to even say it is just kind of ridiculous in the first place, because that ideally you want to have a human experience first, where you're just saying, humans matter. But obviously, you have to just highlight the inequities that we've had in our world when it comes to this. So when you have experienced traveling so many places, seeing so many different cultures, and maybe in some ways being more appreciated abroad than you are at home, what do you think the role of art has played in your perspective of Black Lives Matter versus, maybe the Black Power movement from 30 or 40 years ago versus civil rights in the 50s and 60s, right? So there's these different eras that you might have even bridged and went through. How has your art shaped the way, and your exposure to the world shaped the way that you see the Black Lives Matter movement today?
Well, it gives me clarity. I have my issues with some of those periods that you mentioned. I was raised that, civil rights didn't really mean anything to us. Equal rights. My grandfather said, what is civil rights? He said, what does that really mean in theory, in terms of existing as a human being? He didn't believe in integration. He felt like, the Negro League was so good that white people came to see the games. So there was no reason to have a Jackie Robinson, because it was already happening organically. It's just the government controlled that scenario. So I was kind of informed about those kind of things. My art is basically an equalizer for those movements. We have to make our connection with the continent. I don't care what anybody says. There's no getting around it. For me, that's the part that makes me my N word is navigate. You have to be able to navigate through these things and understand, because in a lot of scenarios we are under attack all the time, all of us folks, brown, Black, etc. But the music allows me to have clarity, because music speaks without race, music speaks without class. It really just speaks to the soul. It's vibrations. It's one of the oldest things that we do as human beings in the universe. We vibrate as the universe vibrates. So when something's vibrating with you, whether you like it or not, you're going to get down with it. I mean, one of the most intense letters we received in the late 80s from our Living Color fan base was a young white kid in prison who was a skinhead. And he said, man, I saw your video in the cafeteria playing, a cult of personality video. And I was raised to hate Black people. Now, I don't know if I'm going to change, but your video did give me something to think about now. I have to go back to my cell. And this cat just wrote us a letter. It was deep. So that, to me, the vibration is the most important part. I like all of the movements, and all of the movements are important. The most important thing is that we unify and we stick together. The Haitian Revolution was successful because one woman, and it took 10 years, got everybody on that island to participate in something that was necessary to help everyone. It wasn't just the mulattoes. It wasn't just the Haitians. It wasn't just the Dominicans. She realized that everybody has to be a part of this to be successful. And if that was 1804, if we can't learn anything from that, we're not going to get anywhere. So you can't put the onus on Black Lives Matter. You can't put the onus on the Panthers. You can't put the onus on SNCC. You can't put the onus on what Dr. King said or Malcolm said. Everybody has their roles. In the basketball team, you got, 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center. You got a position. All 5 guys got to play together to win. That's the forward has a certain position, the center has a certain position. And I think all of these movements are necessary, but we have to be focused on what our goals are. And my art allows me to have clarity on that. Like, I'm not lost in that. I'm aware of all of those things, but I don't want to get jaded by saying, because a lot of people like pointing the gun at Black Lives Matter. They don't have all the answers for it. They're not there to have that, but they are bringing something to the table that needs to be discussed and looked at. So for me, it's, to answer the question directly, it just allows me to have clarity on the movements. But I still believe, like you're a drummer, you've been on the road, when you're on stage, you got to make the ensemble work. The bass player can't be out with the drummer. The singer can't not be singing in tune with the piano player. The killing bands are the band. That's why we love Earth, Wind & Fire, and we love Tito Puente's band, and we love Irikade, or we love Miles Davis. All of these bands together, when they played, it sounds killing because the roles are great, but there's also a teamwork effort. And that's the second most important thing. The first is realization. And the second thing is saying, okay, me and you are having a conversation. The first thing is for us, you and me, to realize we're men and we're going to respect each other. And now we're going to have a conversation. And then we have the conversation. As long as we can start out with those one, two kind of scenarios, that we could begin to move further afield.
It's amazing to me how often people forget that if they just have conversations, it might actually untangle a lot of the misunderstandings that we have in our heads, because we just didn't talk about it. We just ended up being in silence. And I know that some of the historical things in my family have also been rooted in, like, we don't talk back to our elders. We don't ask tough questions. We don't open up about the things that we could probably decode and figure out how to actually maneuver. My family had an amazing conversation last week about divorce in our family and different tough things. And that was like groundbreaking for us. We should have had that conversation 20 years ago, but it happened when it happened. So with that being said, understanding the realization and the conversations that need to happen. When you think, and I'm gonna go, back to Ron, I guess. Ron, when you think about just the unveiling and unrolling of how do we actually use movement music, or how music actually strategizes and organizes us to actually bring us people together and have those conversations, where have you seen the most impact of music being able to start conversations that maybe could not have been started otherwise?
Well, we would probably have to go back to the 60s, and we're talking about James Brown getting involved. We're talking about Miles Davis, Jack Johnson, and but one of the points is before we even get to the music that stimulated us and activated us, you have to go back to the very beginning and give due respect to all of the brothers and sisters who were musicians going back to the 20s, or even going back to the brothers when they stepped off the ship and they started playing the drums and they outlawed the drums. Because when we talk about Louis Armstrong, the Jordans, and all of these other, Jimmy Heath and all these other brothers, you have to realize that they came through a time when lynching was a matter of fact. Jim Crow was at its height, segregation, it's like Will going on stage and they kill him, right? And then they say, hey, you can't go and socialize with the patrons. You have to go sit in the kitchen or go back to the bus. So all of these brothers and sisters, Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit, all of these folks that was on those buses going to the gig, that just going to the gig could have cost you your life, and they got to the gig, they performed, and then they had to go sit in the bus. Billie Holiday talks about she couldn't even use the bathroom as a woman. She had to go in the woods, so musicians from the very beginning have always been, especially Black musicians and Latino musicians, have always been our warriors, and even though we may not mention their names when we're talking about activism, we have to give all of them their due respect, because they're the ones that brought it up and to where it is today. So when you think about on my way to the gig, I could get killed. If the cop pulled us up and say, "Hey, boy," Lou Donaldson was telling me the story about they would drive and go into a gig, and the cops pulled them over, and the cop he didn't say get out, gentlemen. He said, "Okay, all you boys, get your Black behinds out of the car." So at that point, we still were only boys, even as grown men, even as doctors, lawyers, musicians, we were still considered boys and girls, So all of this is to, all of this brings us to Miles Davis playing Jack Johnson, or Herbie Hancock playing a prisoner. So we've gone through a lot. So, and even though a person or individual may not, the title of their song may not be raising their fist in the air and saying, yeah, we're black and proud, and yeah, protest, but maybe that pain that you hear in their solo, or the rhythm section, is all a part of everything that they're trying to get out. And that goes to today. Every activism song isn't necessarily has a title that says it's an activist song, but it's everything inside a musician that comes out that gives us pain, gives us joy. It's almost like America the Beautiful, patriotic song. Person just throw that away. But when you hear Ray Charles play that, Ray Charles brings out all of that black pain, all of that Latino pain, brings out that gospel rhythm, everything that black people, Latino people, brown people have gone through in this country. And when you hear that song and you hear Ray play it, it says, damn right, America, this is my America, and we built this up from nothing, and we're not going anywhere. So the whole concept of black music, Latino music, brown music, African, it's all one. And it's all saying that we are people, we deserve to be here, and we're going to continue to be here.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that history, little road down memory lane in the history as well, to understand the pain that many of us had to endure as musicians, but also our forefathers had to see at a whole nother level than we saw. And so, having something as unifying as music being outlawed, which is just asinine, it's insane, obviously shapes a lot of how we have struggled and battled through to persevere and to really bring the traditions to today. And so, Aurora, I want to actually ask you to just reflect on that a little bit as well, and to think about how like some of these traditions are being passed on from generation to generation. What have you seen? And you can answer any of the questions I've asked so far, but also just add to it, just what have you seen in terms of like the most successful ways to pass on the music traditions to our next generation, but also how do we preserve, the experiences that Ron just talked about, that many young people just don't even understand that we had to go through in order to get to where we are today, to play music so freely now. So how do we preserve it and how do we advance it?
Well, one of the most important things Ron said was about the drum. The drum to me is huge. It's like the heartbeat of all of the music. And the drum, the enslaved Africans came to the New World with the knowledge of how to make a drum. There were no drums in Cuba. I'm sorry, there were no drums there. There was no drums in Puerto Rico, not like that. The natives had drums and they had flutes and stuff, but they didn't have conga drums. The enslaved Africans came with the knowledge. And to me, it's all the criminality that was done here in the US, but one of the worst to me is how they kind of knew that the drum had a voice. The drum was used in Africa, even as when armies would go to fight, they had drummers. One of the reasons the djembe drums has a leather in the front, that used to be like a shield, to shield them when the arrows came. So in Puerto Rico, in Cuba, since the conquistadores were very Catholic, on Sundays, when the enslaved Africans had their day to drum. And the drummings, after a while, they realized that the more drumming, the more insurrections, because they were giving secret codes with the drums, the beats. And somehow here they got a hold of that and they just separated everything. And I find that things like tap dancing and things like that, the ham bone, these are reflections of those drum patterns, of those rhythms. And when you talk about a conversation, I think one of the biggest conversations here that united a lot African Americans with Latinos was the conversation that Dizzy Gillespie had with Chano Pozo. And he wrote about it. And he said how, Chano didn't know a lick of English. He didn't know Spanish, but they knew music. And Dizzy had this wherewithal. He knew he had these roots. And I love reading about him, and because then I got to be very close with Chocolate Amenteros, who Dizzy Gillespie called the Louis Armstrong of the Afro-Cuban trumpet. And he would tell me a lot of stories, how him and Mario Bauza, they would even play tricks on him and things that they would do. But when Dizzy Gillespie had Chano Pozo in that band in 1948, and if you trace it, after 1948, almost all the jazz bands started having conga drums in the bands. Okay, so now the conga becomes an important part of the jazz instrumentation, which before that it was not. So slowly you start seeing these conversations grow together. And then of course in Puerto Rico and in Cuba, the drum then became one of the reasons they got together in the Caribbean, because the conquistadores came alone. After a while, when they developed societies, right, they wanted to be entertained. No European was going to come to these islands to be entertained. They were like, there's nothing there, we're not going. So they had musicians and trumpet players and violin players and all that, but they wanted to jam. And through the church would identify slaves that knew how to drum and knew how to sing. They joined them together, and that was called folk music. The European music was called the salon music. But when it got together, all of a sudden you had this syncopation in the music, which you do not have in European music. So now you have this syncopation, and they also brought the clave. And they also brought, the other thing about our music is that it's so improvisational. And there's a big difference. European music, they have to think about it in their head first. Then they have to write it down. Then it has to be practiced. With us, it's improvised. We celebrate and we get a drum and we dance and we sing. And the singing is even a form, rapping is, our singing was like griots. We made a story on the spot, and we made it rhyme, and we made it timed, and we improvised, but around the structure of a clave, a 5-note, 2-bar beat that would keep the whole thing together, so that when you improvise, you had to improvise in solo within that beat, come out and come in, or else you screw up the whole band. But these are all conversations. And I think during the 60s, it's always been political, especially in Puerto Rico, 1898, when they blew up the USS Maine and took that as an excuse to take Puerto Rico from Spain, and take our island, and then all of a sudden make us US citizens. We didn't come here on boats. Puerto Ricans did not cross no borders. We didn't come over on boats. We were very happy on the island until they came in, put the whole island into poverty. And the first ones that saw the writing on the wall were the musicians, because every town, 28 municipalities, had a marching band. These marching bands were supported. Rafael Hernandez, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, who had come from slavery, they all got out of it and became professional musicians on the island. And on the island, since there were so many people coming around and bartering, you had to play everything from polkas to rancheras to all kinds of music. When that went down after 1917, the first people that came to East Harlem were the artists, were Rafael Hernandez, and even before that, it was Arturo Schomburg was here. Even before they took over Puerto Rico, my great uncle, which my mother was very political, and she would give me the history of Puerto Rico. And she told me about my great uncle, Eugenio Maria de Hostos. He was here in New York. He formed the Revolutionary Party, and it was Arturo Schomburg who was one of the first signatures. So these people were here. And when the artists came, they came because they took down all the marching bands. This was their form of, they had insurance, they had a weekly salary. So they all came here. And they came because also Rafael Hernandez was part of the Reese Europe all Black marching band that went through Europe. Him, Juan Tisol, his brother Jesus. So by 1927, he opens the first Latin music record store on 114th Street in Madison Avenue. So you know how many Puerto Ricans had to be here for him to open a record store and survive? And then at the time, jazz was changing and there was that syncopation that they wanted. And by the 1930s, when you had El Manicero and Siboney, Glenn Miller, all these people were coming to East Harlem looking for arrangers. Duke Ellington saw Juan Tisol in a black circus playing trombone. So you have these conversations that have been happening, at least here in the US, from the 20s with the Puerto Ricans here and Harlem, because when Harlem was in its heyday, Harlem, when Tito Puente and Machito and these guys were popular, Harlem had all these like mambo bands, but they were like instrumental mambo bands because they didn't speak Spanish. So they would just do the coro, right? Mambo, que rico, mambo. But they had all these big bands, you know, so it was a very fertile ground for these conversations and for intertwining the history with the melodies, with the rhythms, with the politics.
Yeah, and that's a great walk down. God, so much history of how African influence and everything really shapes our lives, but also on top of that, as you mentioned, the nonverbal communication of music that can even extend well beyond any sort of words can. And so, you know, I think about music as a power to heal. I think about even I have this this moment with music in my own journey where I remember just kind of in other countries struggling to communicate while traveling and just using music as a means of just getting on the same page. And so I know that, like, you know, the stories you tell about, you know, being in different places, but then we don't speak the same language, but we can communicate this way, really does impact our ability to use that. So I'm wondering, anyone can answer this question, but I'm wondering also when it comes to sort of the political movements that you talk about that we were engaging in and really trying to figure out where our voices as Black and Brown people in this country or even internationally have really fit in. Where has music for you, where have you seen music move the needle politically to begin to open those doors? Or where do you think that it has a role for going forward, at least for this next even presidential administration in this new period that we're in, that apparently is supposed to be post-Trump, but yet we're still in this sort of very racialized society. Where have you seen music cause political shift in your experience? And where do you think it takes us for the next generation? Where do we leave that next generation behind that we contributed so far? I'm gonna leave that open.
Well, I can jump in real quick and give you the example of Cortijo y su Combo in 1954. And this could only have happened in Puerto Rico. Television was the new medium. And Cortijo, because of Bobby Capó, becomes the first all-Black orchestra to be showcased to be the house band on this show in Puerto Rico, El Show de Mediodía, that comes on every day, sort of a variety show of those days, like Ed Sullivan, you know, kind of that type of show. He's the house band. He's got this sextet of all Afro Boricua dudes. And the story is when Bobby Capó, who had toured here in the US with, he toured a little bit with Nat King Cole and the Dunham Dancers, and he hated the racism here so bad. When he went back to Puerto Rico, he was like the darling. And, but he was of color, but he was a handsome guy. So he was the producer of the show. Cortijo was his buddy. So when they did the show, he broke through the color barrier, because in those days, the big hotels, the condados, if you were a Black artist, you had to go through the kitchen and you could not stay there.
Right.
So Bobby Capó, for the first night, went and reserved the rooms. And after they played and they went to get their rooms, and the manager started complaining, Bobby Capo showed up and said, wait a second, I paid for these rooms. This is my band. They're staying here. And what was very important about that time too, Cortijo took like the Afro Puerto Rican rhythms, bomba, plena, and he commercialized them. And he made them danceable at a time when the rhythms that were selling in Puerto Rico were Afro-Cuban rhythms, were Cuban rhythms. He took these rhythms and he commercialized them. And then Cortijo used to play in all these festivals with the steel bands on the Virgin Islands in Jamaica. So he took a little bit of soca, he mixed it with the timbal. And when he came out with Bomba y Plena, and he had these hits and he was on TV, it was what the people tell me then and what he told me, it was like they had opened the cage to an Afro Boricua identity and had let them all out. And here they were singing these songs, and they were singing songs about racism. And Negro de Bembon, if you translate that, the big lip Negro, Negro Bembon. And it's about, but when you hear the song, they're talking about how he was unjustly killed just because he was Black. And you don't do that. And these songs, I mean, this was on the radio. So 10 years before the Civil Rights Act was signed here in the US, Cortijo y su combo was on TV doing his own revolution, because in Cuba they had a dictator, in Santo Domingo they had a dictator, and they were not putting Black faces on there. In fact, they had white Cubans and white Dominicans in blackface.
Wow. So
this happened in Puerto Rico, and even 2 years before Nat King Cole had his one-season show here in New York. Cortijo did that. Wow. And I find that still that people don't find this to be like a historic chapter in American music, because it's American music.
It is. Yeah, 100%. 100%. And that is a direct tie to the civil rights movement, to the actual laws that now integrated schools, integrated public places, restaurants, hotels, yada, yada, all began from moments like that. That was a moment right there. And that needs to be documented. And you know, and what I love that you're saying too, Aurora, because I know that many people don't probably feel this way, but some still don't understand that when we're talking about Black history, we're also talking about Latino history, we're talking about Latinx history, we're talking about, you know, Caribbean history. You know, people still don't realize that so many more Black people were taken from Africa and put in the Caribbean, and even in the United States, you know, put in Mexico more than the United States, put in these places. And we forget that that's all rooted from that same African beautiful root. But because sometimes people get caught up in the language and what that Spanish being different than English, we miss out. And
the thing is that nowadays, I mean, when you look at a genre like bomba, right? The bomba rhythms, the bomba drums, the bomba dance, these were rhythms of resistance. When I wrote a song about domestic violence and violence against women, which is still a huge problem in music and in every genre. But and I wanted it in the form of a bomba song, because it's the music of resistance. And the bomba was resistance to slavery in Puerto Rico, which is why after a while in Puerto Rico and in Cuba, the drum was outlawed. But again, we're people of a lot of resilience. And then what did we do? We created these wooden cartons, and they would drum on the wooden cartons when the police would come. Oh, there's no congas here. And that's how cajones were started. But it's a fascinating history.
Yeah, Ron, go ahead, jump on in, man.
Yeah, Aurora, when you're talking about the whole drum situation and the drums were outlawed, if we go back to 2014, when gentrification has basically taken over Harlem, and there was some folks from gentrification that now live across from Marcus Garvey Park.
I know, I saw that.
And you remember all of the drummers, the tradition that had been going on in Marcus Garvey Park for over 25 years. Saturdays and Sundays, all of the brothers would go over there and they would play their drums. But our new neighbors, gentrified, they took offense to hearing a drum. To to them it wasn't tradition, it was noise. So they start writing complaints. Those complaints went to Mayor Bloomberg. So Mayor Bloomberg first, I think he tried to ignore it, and then he put like a time frame on when the brothers could play. They kept complaining. So the time limit eventually went, the brothers stopped playing. Arturo Farrell did an album called In Response to the Drums.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did.
So now we're talking about Aurora took it all the way back, but here we are, 2014, they outlawed the drums again.
Don't you remember when Giuliani wanted to take out the Central Park Rumberos?
Right.
And they're still going strong on Sundays, but there was a time after the Mariels came in the 80s, he was on a rampage. They toned it down for a while, but
right.
He was Giuliani. Well, you know, he was aggressive. So, but they've been wanting to do that. So first they did it in Central Park Rumberos, and I remember when they were trying to do it in Marcus Garvey Park because we were supporting those drummers.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, you all saying some truth right here. I live, obviously, Ron and I live close to that neighborhood too, and not only do you see drummers there, you see them on 125th and Adam Clayton Powell in front of the building. You see them, I see them actually on 135th between 5th and Lennox playing. And
just to give you a little bit of history, when Chano Pozo was here, it was hard to get a drum here. And when you had drums back in the day, you could only tune them with fire and sterno stoves. It was Mongo Santa Maria. When he came, he had drums with lugs. And then he had a singer, a coro singer from Puerto Rico. They came here, and the coro singer, Junior, he stayed. He knew how to make the drums. He went into Brooklyn. He started making these handmade drums. He was selling them to, I think, Manny's Music Shop. And that's when all the fellas started getting drums. If you remember the 60s, every corner you went to, every West Pocket Park, people were drumming. The guys were drumming on, and then when the cops would come, we'd go to the roof. So we were drumming on the roof. We were drumming on the fire escape. It was everywhere. People were drumming, and they were listening to the records, you know? And I loved it back in those days because the DJs broke the records, like I said before. And you went to the dances, and it was the Stylistics, the Shirelles, Ray Barretto, Eddie Palmieri. It was like this mix that was like so awesome, you know? And now everything is separated like frozen dinners.
Right.
That's real. That's real talk.
That's the idea. That's the idea, is to do that.
So just to expand on that, like, so obviously, you know, art has taken a hit with COVID-19, and there's been a lot less performances live that we can see, and so artists may be struggling now more than they ever have before. So
not only that, there's the corporatization of the radio stations. Like I said before was DJs. DJs can't do that now. There's 5 corporations. They own the commercial radio stations. Yeah. They give the DJs a list, and if they don't play from that list, they get fired.
Yeah.
So everything's gone underground again.
It literally.
That's how it was the boom. And remember Boogaloo, and I mean, now this is all underground.
Yeah, what happened is Symphony Sid and Frankie Crocker.
Yeah, those were the guys that made this.
Yeah, that's right. And so I'm curious now that you know, I mean, I was reading an article recently about how like 95% of the music that we listen to are controlled by white media, you know, white 5, like you mentioned, the 5 companies that are basically deciding what we listen to. So, you know, it's so hard to find music that you love unless you really have, you know, again, specifically direct connect. So I just love to hear, and maybe Will, you can start off with this, in terms of just like where do you find that they will, I feel like COVID-19 is gonna affect us for years, right? It's gonna be a while before we see the regular standard number of performances that you were used to doing, and maybe seeing concerts and show, even Broadway, everyone's taking a hit, right? So where do you think music is going? How does it still play a role in our community, and how does it affect even your approach to getting the message through music out to the world? How does it affect you?
Well, one of the things we have to do is get back to the things Aurora's talking about. In my opinion, the industry promoting music is a part of the music. It didn't start with the industry. The industry was built on the backs and ideas of African music. Our industry was family. Our industry was weddings and happy water, rain, beats for rain, and these type of things. So we should never separate ourselves from our origins. No one else does in any other culture. So the things that we're connected to, we have to maintain. If we don't maintain those things, then we're going to get separated, and we're going to lose them. And no one else of any other culture in history done it. Sometimes with us, mostly it's done by force, but we still have our own responsibility, and we should still remaining to play together. We're never going to, in my opinion, get anything across without sticking to our history. That's just my opinion. You know, your grandma makes a certain kind of a pie. You can sit down there, and the only way you're going to learn how to make that pie, you got to sit there and watch her do it. And you got to taste it. You got to dip your finger in that batter. You got to see how many minutes, and maybe you'll be able to get it. If she writes that recipe down and you copy it, it won't taste the same. So but with culture, we have to maintain, to me, the roots. So, and even playing music today, I feel like, yeah, there's the clubs, there's radio and so on, but something special happens being a musician when you get together. Like, I rehearse in my house. You know, I just like to have the fellas come over or the ladies come over, and we cook and we play, because those were, since I was a child, watching my older brother and watching Ray Q and Steve Jordan and other people that were older than me, those were the best kind of jam sessions and rehearsals. They weren't so corporate. The things that happen on the island, the things that happen on the continent were kind of that way. If we maintain those things, I think we'll be able to persevere as we have for thousands of years with our culture and our music. The minute we're no longer able to have those kind of contacts and community, that's why they're being broken up. I'm up here in North Bronx, and you know, City Island had drummers out there all the time playing as well on the beach, Orchard Beach, same scenario. And the idea is for those things that they're disturbing for some people because they're real. Those are real vibrations. That's real communication. When I'm in Mali, it took me a long time to do it. 4 years of going to this particular village 4 times a year to meet the hunters. The hunters, I'm just going to give you a small example. The hunter musicians are musicians that most Malians, political artists, don't like to be around, because when they look at you, they look through you. They're real artists that play real music. And the hunter's vibe is the vibration of the music. It brings you back to, so politicians and folks, they don't want the hunters around when they do these events. They like the way that they look because it's like a traditional Mali vibe, but they're not a joke. It's not a circus with them. It's real. And seeing those cats play, it reminded me of the importance of our music and our culture. That's what it is. It's the spiritual bind that we have to keep connected. So how we're going to move it forward is COVID, whatever the case may be. We've survived much worse, harsh things than COVID. I mean, COVID is crackers and cheese compared to what we've gone through and our grandparents. I'm sorry. I don't mean that any negative way. I don't mean that in any demeaning way. Certainly we are losing lives. And it's not, I've lost friends and colleagues, as we probably all are on this call. However, as human beings in our culture, what we had to deal with, you know, I went to Ornette Coleman's house, and Ornette Coleman talked to me about coming home from school with his saxophone, seeing Black people hanging from trees that were dead. Seeing, I mean, he said it to me like, he says, Will, when I walked home from school in Texas, this is what I saw. And to this day, he's one of the kindest human beings, certainly kindest musicians I've ever met. So what is it about our experience that makes us like brilliant in that way and also forgiving on some level? My point still is we have to have that connection. All of those brilliant examples given, all contact, you know, we can't forget about Ray. We can't forget about China Pozo. We cannot forget about that. They are the early versions of the equalizers and how we get to what we're getting to now. You can't forget about your grandmother. You can't forget about your grandfather. You can't forget about your mother, your uncle. You forget about them, you're not going to be able to carry on. You can't have children and invest anything in them if you diss your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents. When you have your children, you're not going to have any format. You're just going to be borrowing ideas off of people to raise your own children, and then they're going to be off the rails. So all of these things are very important. And I'll leave on this note. one of the things I laughed about, but it wasn't funny, but it was kind of funny, was one of my trips to Mali. I went to this village and these drummers came out and played me a welcoming thing. We were talking, eating some food and hanging out. So one of the drummers said, "Hey brother, where you from?" I said, "Oh, I'm from the States. I'm from New York." He goes, "Yeah, how do you African American people get function?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, I hear about your mother is in Chicago and your father is in St. Louis and your aunt is in LA and your uncle is in Detroit. How do you get power?" That was the question he wanted to know from me. With everybody spread out like that, how do you get power? You seem like a brother that has power. That's what he was just asking me. He said, "How do you?" I don't understand, like, because in the village that I was in, everybody was in the same space, grandma. Now that might drive you crazy on a gossip family tip, but they had power. There was when I went there, I felt like invincible just being around his mother and his grandparents and his father, etc. So that was a very interesting question, but it was a real one. How do you get power with everybody being all spread out? Is the information still contained? Those things that we had to recreate when we came to this country, brought here, etc., is a reason. Is a reason why drums had to be built, and certain medicines were designed that protected a lot of white folks that the slaves were not catching certain diseases, and they wanted to know why the slaves were okay, but the white folks were dying. Mm-hmm. So there's all of these things that happened culturally that we had to hold on to, and we can't get jaded by technology, what's new, what's fresh, the new radio. All of those things are fascinating. My grandfather used to tell me, we're traveling backwards. The greatest things already happened. We're losing the plot now. We're going the wrong direction. So get what you can get now, because if this continues, you're going to have zero at the end of the day. Pay attention to what happened before you. That's the real stuff if you want to be able to go forward. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose the plot.
Mm-hmm. We have to inherit that. I think, everybody should be playing drums again.
Yes.
They're not. Nobody's teaching this. We didn't inherit. I have to say, my generation did not do a good job of handing down this legacy to the next generation.
You make a great point. You make a brilliant point there. As I want to just say one thing, sorry. I tried to have a conference, and I won't drop the names because I'm kind of in between a generation of jazz cats, at least when they were calling them young lions, that new generation, and hip hop. So I was trying to have this meeting, and I had it at the Vanguard in during the day in the club downstairs the afternoon. I was trying to get jazz cats and rappers together because I felt like the Black community was majorly, separating. And I heard jazz guys say negative things about rappers, but rappers respect jazz musicians. I was trying to tell the jazz cats, these DJs, they go out to record conventions and they spend $400 on Miles Smiles. They're trying to get the information, but you can't get angry at a rap producer who doesn't know how to play piano or doesn't know chord melody if you're not teaching it to him.
Or if he doesn't know what an oboe is. They took music out of the schools in the 80s. Yeah. The Reagan era took music out of the schools. That's how, and when you have a generation who was brought up that never heard Mozart, never heard Dizzy, never heard Glenn Miller, never heard Lito Puente, this is what you're gonna get. Right. Even the poetry is like, roses are red, violets are blue. Yo, I smoked 2 blunts. You know what they say. Because we had it in public schools. And if you look at Latin music here, most of those salsa musicians, we were the children, the American children, they disregarded, rejected their parents' big band music. We didn't do that. We embraced our parents' salsa music, but we made it our own. We made it into boogaloo. We brought in elements of R&B, of jazz, of rock, of what was going on at that time, and we brought it into the music. But and everybody at that time, Johnny Pacheco, Nicky Marrero, Eddie Palmieri, 13, 14, 15 years old, they had their own bands. Their parents had like record shops in the Bronx. I mean, it was like all over. And now you don't have any of that. Everything is canned. And then in the 60s, when all of that was happening, we had places like the New Rican Village. The New Rican Village was like a petri dish for musical creativity. And there you had Oscar Hernandez, Andy and Jerry Gonzalez. I mean, you had these bands that came out of this, I'm telling you, it was like an explosion of creative sounds that was a mix of what was going on the streets of New York. You don't have that anymore. And where could we gather now? There's no place to gather. Everything's commercialized. In the 80s, after Reagan and that whole cutting up of the city by Trump, it was over.
It's over, but then again, once again, it's up to us to create those spaces.
That's right.
We have to create the spaces. It might start with somebody's living room. We've always been able to overcome that situation, and only because we've always been connected to the things that make us who we are. The minute we stop doing that, it's true. I was there in the 80s when stuff got taken out of schools. I just missed the cut of going to school when everybody had a trombone or a violin. You know, you had a number, and it was public school. You had your locker. You took out everybody played in band. Band was just
Selmer instrument. They gave you instruments. The Selmer instrument.
It was just important as math or science or gym, any other class. So that raised the level of it. But it is my friends laugh at me when I tell them disco music was the most dangerous music, current music, and they say why, and I said because it was the one time. Park the music for a minute if you can, but socially, Blacks, Puerto Ricans, Jews, rich people, everybody, whether everybody was doing blow or doing whatever they were doing, hanging out, getting high, getting smashed, graffiti, that music brought a bunch of people even into the same space.
Yep.
People were just getting smashed with people, you know, the Madison Avenue guy was getting smashed with the guy from 145th. Everything was that music, you know, everybody wanted to learn how to disco. Everybody wanted to learn how to hustle. The salsa vibe was in there, the graffiti kids, the hip hop, and all of a sudden.
The guys from Harlem, in Harlem, the guys, everybody knew how to Latin. You know how Latin?
You have to learn, but then there was this very rude thing of disco sucks. And even at the time I was like, well, does the music suck or does the culture suck? Like, why are they taking a steamroller and running over smashing records? They haven't done that with any other record, any other music that I think could have deemed itself to be rolled over by a steamroller. But the fact of the matter is, I looked at that social climate as almost being dangerous. Yeah. It was a cultural dangerous moment of all of these things kind of coming together. So to get to the point of the question, the statement of the question is just, we have to really rebuild and rethink those spaces. When I can't wait for a venue to open or radio station to get on board, it's not going to happen that way. Technology is on our side, and we have to use it in a way that's going to suit our needs, just like anything else. You know, you have to use it the way that's going to work for you, and that's how we're going to get to the next page, because we still have the Schomburg, and you know, we have the African American Museum in Washington D.C. We still have landmark places to go and get information. But people right here in our own city have to get together, and we got to use the Schomburg, and we got to still use the park, and we got to use so-and-so's living room and so-and-so's basement at Abyssinian Baptist Church or whatever the venue is going to be, because it's not the venue, it's what's going on in the venue. That's what it is.
It comes down to the community. We're all saying it comes down to the communication between all of us, because we have. Everything that's happened to us to date has happened to us as a unit or as a race, you know, so we can't now try to go individual and do stuff. We have to do it, as you're saying, we have to do it together as a unit, because when they came after us, it was as a unit. You know, Jim Crow wasn't about 5 Black people over there. Jim Crow was about all the Black people and all of the people of color. Segregation wasn't just about 10 Puerto Ricans over here. It was about all of us, you know. So when we talk about what we're going to do in the schools and all that, we have to come back as a unit and say, hey, this is what needs to be done in the school. We have the musicians. We have some instruments. This is what we're going to do. You know, we can't continue to ask, you know, for what we want or come with a cup. We got to come with demands, and behind us has to be the means to back up that demand.
I love that. And listen, I want to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I want to make sure I take at least one audience question before we do that. First of all, y'all all welcome to come to my living room and play music anytime you want. We'll definitely have live band action. That would be so amazing.
No, man, Will's drums are too large. His drums will take up your entire living room, man. If you ever see the photos of his drums, man, he has around 12 kits. You know, one is like 12 by 12.
I can see my hand drum.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, look, brother.
Can bring my panderos.
Yeah.
Hey, Sean, I'll go old school, man. I get the brushes and play your newspaper, man. I keep it old
There you
school.
go.
Hey, you do a Max Roach on them, man. Just play the sticks.
Exactly. I remember that video. And so I do want to take one audience question. And so this is a good way to wrap up, I think, today too, because one of the audience members asked, can you speak to the impact of music on our mental health? And I think that's an important question because of the idea that, you know, as you mentioned, it has carried us through so many different iterations of oppression that it cannot be quenched, right? We cannot quench the impact of music in society. So I'd love for you to all wrap up with just answering that question and also leaving us with at least one resource or way that young people who are watching this right now can find out how to understand their history, understand the impact of music on their history. You all mentioned a lot of great names and a lot of great history, but maybe there's a resource or a book or a museum or somewhere you think young people should actually check out in order to teach themselves what their history has been in this world. So impact of music on mental health, and then a resource, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
All right, very, very quickly for me on the mental health piece. I mean, we have to get back to our spirituality. You know, as people, we've meditated. You know, we dealt with. There are sound healing things as well. I know some musicians that only play for healing purposes. They play, you know, water bowls and these kind of things. So in terms of the mental health and that challenge, part of our issues come from stress, and I think you have to have a relief, whether it's Miles Davis and being in the tub in your crib, or you just light a candle in your bedroom, whatever, lay down on the bed and you put on whatever it is that you know, Staple Singers or Eddie Palmieri, whatever it is that makes you chill. Silence also works as a great healer. Not to have anything going on. It's difficult to get to that place, but that's a grand equalizer sometimes. It's just shut the thoughts down, shut the noise down, and just listen to yourself. That's healing in its own. In terms of venues, I will say the Schomburg and the African Museum in Washington, D.C. are two great places where you'll hear and see many of the people that we talked about today, their music, you'll see their album covers, you'll get to hear it. And it's a fantastic, brilliant library culturally for us to do most of the research. I recommend both of those institutions, and I'll let the other grand esteemed colleagues make their points as well.
Thank you, Will. Who wants to go next? Ron?
Oh, okay. As far as the music and spiritualism, you know, music definitely helps our being. There's no question about that. When I was covered the Panama Jazz Festival a few years ago, Danilo Perez's wife, Patricia Perez, she had started she had a whole panel, but she's totally involved in this worldwide music and health. They have an organization in Denmark. They're actually studying at NYU, you know, so the whole music thing definitely helps us, especially in the world of COVID now and the pandemic. You know, like music mellows you out. Like Will said, if you're in the tub listening to Miles or Ella or whoever, or sitting on your couch just laid back listening, it does a lot for you. You know, it's probably much better than taking the value.
Yes, it is.
I want to insert one thing. Sorry, I want to insert one thing. If you young people can too, try to get to the analogs of sound. Get a vinyl if you can, or a cassette. It does academically have a different impact on your entire being, on your ears. If you just, I'm sorry, I just want to say that. I know everybody's digital, but there is a difference, an academic difference in how analog sound affects the human spirit, ears, mind, soul, than digital. So I just wanted to interject that the live music piece and analog music should be included in that. I'm sorry, I didn't want to.
Vibration is very important.
Right.
If you look at any temple of worship, anyone of any religion, it's built with a certain dome, and it's done that way for the acoustics, for the vibration. Not only praying, the sound of praying or chanting, but also music, whether it's hymns. I was in the church chorus when I was 7 years old, Catholic church. And I remember being up there by the organist. And there was a point in those days was when the church, we sang in Latin. Before they even had Spanish masses or anything, we sang in Latin. And I remember being a child, hitting a certain note. I don't know if it was because of the wood, the dome, the organ, but I remember hitting this note and my whole body vibrating. And I felt like God was inside me. And then again, when I was 15 and I was in this orchestra, the Worldwide Orchestra, 60 pieces, and I'm playing bass, a German bass with a bow. And we're playing the Hallelujah chorus. And the chorus is accompanying us. And here's 60 different kids, all playing in different sections. And yet it was one voice and one vibration. I remember that after we had the show, I was crying and I didn't know why. And it was the vibration. And then 14 years ago, I got breast cancer. And at that time, we just cut our first CD. And of course, my doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering, they all knew about it. And when I went for the operation for the mastectomy, I went with my CD and I said, could you play this during the operation? They all smiled. They had Tito Puente, Celia Cruz. They had all these CDs lined up for the operation that they were going to play while I was getting operated. And I have to say, during this pandemic, personally, I've had over a dozen friends die.
Wow.
By April, I was so depressed. I didn't even want to pick up the phone because it was like one more person. And then all the gigs got canceled, our speaking engagements. And I called my brother. My brother's a great percussionist. He was an original Central Park rumbero. And I called him, I said, we got to write a song. I'm on the floor. He even said, you want to call 311? I said, 311 doesn't answer. And he started calling me, what about this? He started giving me some beats. And we came up with a song, a plena, for the pandemic. Quédate en tu casa, no vaya a la fonda. Ten mucho cuidado que no te infecte el virus corona. And we went on with that, saying the story of, but it felt healing after a while. I put it on my website. People liked it.
Right.
And it snapped me out of the depression.
Right.
So yeah, music is not only a political voice, it's a healing voice. Music is part of who we are. We're humans. We vibrate. We all have a vibe. Yeah. And we've, throughout the centuries, learned how to channel those vibes and make music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We can't separate that music now. That music has to all come together. It's not frozen TV dinners. It's music. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that person asked that question. Please thank them because, you know, Aurora, you make that comment, and it's a guy I grew up with. That's pretty hard. This cat, you can't shake him, you can't bake him. This dude is a statue. And he called me last week and told me he's on antidepressants.
No.
I freaked out. Like, this is the cat that, you know, he was running the streets. He was doing the thing. He was.
Tell him to be careful. They can be addictive.
Well, I had a talk with him, and I got some of the other homies together, and we did a group call.
Yeah.
And we talked to his wife to make sure, because for him to call me and tell me that at this time was, I mean, I was blown away, because this cat, you couldn't shake him with anything. He looked death, fear, whatever in the eye, and smile and go, who's next? And we're in that told me the level of it when you talk about being on the floor and calling your brother. So I'm glad you did that. And I'm glad he reached out to me and just said, you know, Calhoun, I'm not feeling good. Oh, by the way, and then I was frozen on the call. So we talked with the friends. We all got on a call. We talked to his wife, and we all going to try to work together with that situation so it doesn't become habitual for him. But I definitely, Sean, want to thank the person that asked that question, because that just happened to me 4 days ago.
Wow.
Sean, let me also say, aside from the music, if anyone wants to read a book, a good book to read would be Amiri Baraka's Digging, or Randy Weston's autobiography, African Rhythms.
Okay.
Good.
And if anybody wants to know about Puerto Rican history, a good book on Puerto Rican history, very popular book now, that it's not academic, which I like, so it can give people at least good information, and then they can do their own research afterwards. It's called The War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nelson.
Yes, that's a
Please
great book.
read that book, The War Against All Puerto Ricans.
Yes.
While we'll be getting those resources, we'll be sharing those with the community. We're going to go to local bookstores to try to support them as well whenever possible. I can't thank y'all enough for just opening up your mind and your hearts to go down that memory lane with us today and share great information, resources that are recorded, they're tracked, they're going to be shared with communities for generations to come through our YouTube platform and through different BMI projects. Please, just let us know real quick, where can we find you? Where can we follow what you're doing? Anything you want to promote right now, this is your chance. Will, Ron, Aurora, please let us know. Ron, anything you want us to follow you on? Any Instagram?
Please read my column in the Amsterdam News every Thursday.
Yes.
If you can find the Amsterdam News on the street, you could go to amsterdamnews.com, check it out. And I'm on Instagram, Ron_Scott Jazz.
All right, Ron_Scott Jazz. Awesome. We'll share that as well. Will, where can we find you?
I'm at willcalhoun.com, so my regular website. You mentioned my art website. I do visual art and photography. That's willcalhounart.com. Okay. And you can basically find me on Instagram. That's Will Calhoun Drum. And there you'll see stuff like what we're talking about now and whatever I'm doing live and clinics, etc. So thanks for asking.
Absolutely. I can't wait to tell my cousin about our conversation too. I'm excited, man. So thank you. Aurora.
I have some articles on Medium. If you go to Medium, put up my name, Aurora Flores, and I have Will, and I think, Ron, you read it already. I have a good article on there about meeting Tito Puente for the first time before there was a Me Too movement. And I'm sure, and actually he saved me, all right? So it's a good thing. And I talk about meeting him and La Lupe when I was like 19, 20 years old. And
wow. I want to see that.
Yeah, so I have that on Medium. You can look it up, and I have other articles on Medium. I have my cancer testimonial. I have talking about Christmas time in Puerto Rico and how my mother used to love the Santeria music, but my father's family were Pentecostal. So they were my mother smoked a cigar. She did the que viva Chango. She was all that. And anyway, so I write about that. But I also have my YouTube channel where I just did a video in tribute to our Christmas tree in East Harlem. And I did a little tour around East Harlem. And I have Eddie Palmieri talking on there about his whole neighborhood, and Joe Bataan, the Afro-Filipino that everybody thought was Puerto Rican. And then Tito Puente Jr. and a great poem by Willie Perdomo about how we take these streets. And so all of that is on my YouTube channel, which is Aurora ZDB, like Zone del Barrio. So Aurora ZDB on YouTube and on Instagram and on Facebook.
Got you. We'll follow, subscribe, and support. Thank you all for this time today. This concludes our session. Have a great day. To our community, my family, we look forward to bringing more content starting up again next semester. And so I hope you enjoyed our time together today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Dawn. Appreciate it, man.
My pleasure. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I chat to all of you.
It's amazing. I'll send you all text messages separately.